All right, we're recording. All right, welcome to Clark Park After Dark. We're trying to do something new and be COVID friendly and still be able to showcase some of the cool things that we're doing in the park. We had a couple technical difficulties, so we're getting a start late, or a late start. It's getting late. It is after dark after all. But here we are with Ed Williams and the inventor of the Lear Garden, which we put in this weekend with Tempe Cares and wanted to kind of showcase kind of this new cutting edge technology in gardening. It is being demonstrated here at Clark Park. Welcome, Ed.
Thank you.
So go tell us a little bit about your garden.
Okay, so this is a Lear garden, and basically the way, wow, that's really hard. I can't, it's a delay on the, I was trying to see if we could hear a little bit better by putting the phone in my thing, but it's really hard to listen to yourself talk on a delay.
Yeah.
So the way a Lear garden works is it's actually a soil-based system. So it actually gardens, it looks a little bit superficially like aquaponics, but it's actually a soil-based system. So it works by a whole bunch of different soil making methodology. So I created it by combining about 12 different styles of gardening. It's things like vermicomposting and organic gardening and myco vermicomposting, and there's a whole bunch of different things that go together to make it. So the soil itself is very, very biologically active. It actually creates its own soil in place. So if you look at the soil that we've got here, let me kind of lift it up. We've got, see if you can see this here. This is basically mulch. It's partially broken down mulch. And what's going to happen is this isn't actually great soil for most gardens. For a Lear garden, this is actually perfect because it's going to keep breaking down into soil. And it does that through a variety of different methods. It uses mushrooms to break down the woody material. It uses earthworms to break it down further into soil, and it basically creates a really, really robust ecosystem. So then you have the mechanical aspects of the garden that help to kind of keep the biology moving. So that's the part that looks a little bit like aquaponics. So there's a bed here. The bed has a pond liner in it, so any water that gets put into the garden, actually, if the plants don't use it, it flows through the garden and then drains back down. The water comes from a tank, so let's go down to this side. So over here we have, let me go ahead and lift this up. We put this up so nobody would fall in.
We're still in the processes of completing it.
Yeah, so this is a tank. This tank right now the water is probably what, 1.5 feet deep, something like that. And the water, we've got a float valve down here that tops off the tank anytime it runs a little bit low. We have a sprayer that turns on once a day, and it mists the surface to kind of help keep the whole water column moist, and it helps with starting seeds. And we've got a pump down here that's running off of this white pipe, and that turns on a timer, and the water flows up through the pipe, and it flows in at the other end of the garden. And so where that flows in over here this is a compost bin. We've got a little bit of extra lumber here, so we can finish off a couple of cosmetic changes. But the water will flow in through this pipe right here. When it pours into the garden, it flows. This is eventually going to be, well, this is now a compost bin. but it'll eventually be filled with compost that will break down in place. Um, so the water flows through here, it flows through the garden, and anything that doesn't get taken up by the soil or the plants drains back down into the bed. So the compost itself here, as it breaks down, it'll release nutrients, and it'll release those directly into the water. Those nutrients get added to the soil. The plants will take them up before they get down to the end there, and it'll help increase the fertility of the system as a whole.
Awesome. So we're getting compost tea directly into the soil every single time we water.
Correct.
And then we're getting soil, we're making soil, and we're infusing it with all the nutrients that we need directly from the compost tea, and then also from the mushrooms that are in here,
Correct.
and also the worms that are creating castings and all of that. So it's all creating its own little
Correct.
ecosystem
Correct.
within itself.
Correct. Yeah. So, in terms of the mushrooms, you can kind of see. I don't know if you can see this here. This is a log that we put in. This log has been plugged with reishi mushroom spawn, and basically what'll happen is over the next probably 6 months to a year, that will grow onto that log. Assuming everything works, mushrooms can be a little finicky sometimes, and then we'll actually get reishi mushrooms that grow up out of this. I also put down more at the other end some uh, other kinds of mushroom spawn of an edible mushroom called a king stropharia, or a wine cap mushroom. And that's a soil-borne mushroom that'll actually get in it, and it'll start breaking down this woody material that's in the soil here.
So we're also creating a byproduct of soil that
Hmm.
can be used in this garden, and then also eventually
Correct.
in the main garden as
Exactly. Yeah. So the one of the things that a Lear garden does is it takes it actually makes its own soil in place from raw materials, and we cheated a little bit by using this mulch from the city. But this, we actually could have started with something that's a little bit more like woody material, chopped up branches and whatnot, um, and it would totally make that into soil. But it actually makes the soil as an output. So about once or twice a year, we need to harvest the soil and take it out, because it actually the system works best while it's making soil. So when you take the soil out and you harvest it, you can go take it out and you can put it in the garden beds in the rest of the garden, and those will actually help improve the soil elsewhere, and it'll take the carbon from the soil that's breaking down and actually sequester it in the ground in the rest of the garden.
so, what are some of the benefits? I'm going to go set this down so that we can talk a little bit more. What are some of the benefits of having a Lear garden bed over an in-ground bed or a raised bed, or any of the, or aquaponics? Why is combining all of them have more benefits?
The big benefit is that the system actually closes some of the holes. When I first created this, what I was trying to do was create something that that doesn't require a ton of maintenance. I started this when I moved to Phoenix 8 years ago, and what I was trying to do was create something. I realized that through the heat of the summer, the garden's going to need to be watered several times a day, and sometimes I'm not going to get to it for several days at a time. So I needed something that was going to take care of itself as much as possible, something that could kind of reduce the labor and automate as many pieces as possible. And if you look at any garden system out there, including in-ground gardening, raised bed gardening, aquaponic gardening, they all have pieces that require labor. So in aquaponics, you need to test the water daily, every single day. It'll water itself, but you got to make sure that your water chemistry is good. You got to make sure that your fertility is good. In a container garden, you have to water it again daily. You can kind of
And
set it
add
up
nutrients
and add nutrients and all of that stuff. So
So this kind of levels itself out and kind of creating
exactly,
that bio
exactly.
system and everything in there. It levels itself out.
Yeah.
And then in the summer, I know for me in my personal garden, my bill can be over $200 a month in
Hmm.
water. How much water? So I'm estimating probably anywhere from 100 to 150 gallons a day.
Hmm.
How many gallons does this take during the day
This one
or during the
here
summer?
in the summertime, um, this one here will probably take in the neighborhood of about 20 gallons a day, maybe 30 in the heat of the summer when it's 115 degrees. And there's a lot of plant growth in it. It's going to take um, typically a third, maybe a quarter of the water of a regular garden.
Yeah.
Um, my garden is I use my garden's about this one's what 24 times 3, it's about 75 square feet worth of garden. My garden is about 350 square feet, and I use the water to evaporation of water to actually cool the fish tank so that the fish don't get too hot. And mine uses about 50 gallons a day in the heat of the summer.
And it's 3 times the size
And
of
it's yeah,
it's
so
three
it's
times.
it's it's like it's over 3 times, almost 4 times the size of this one. So
Right.
so this would probably be about 20 or 30 gallons a day in the heat of summer.
Yeah. And even with our little beds here, we water them at least twice a day on the
Hmm.
irrigation and probably about 20 to 40 minutes
Yeah,
a day. So it's quite a bit of water usage.
yeah. And so this one is very very water efficient. The garden itself, it'll water itself. Right now, it's set up to water itself 8 times a day for 15 minutes, but all it does is it pumps the water out of the tank, and it flows up, and then it flows through. And anything that doesn't get taken up by the soil just drains right out the back and gets added back to the tank.
So one of the other benefits that I've noticed too from these gardens is you can plant a lot more in a smaller space
Hmm.
because the plants themselves are getting all the nutrients they need.
Yep.
We can actually not have to worry about depleting the soil as much.
Correct. Yeah. So the as the soil breaks down, the soil organisms will take the nutrients that are in the water, whether they come from the breakdown of the soil itself, whether they come from uh, the breakdown of the compost that's in there, or even if they come from the fish that we'll eventually put in the fish tank. The soil organisms are just absolutely voracious about grabbing those nutrients out of the water, and we could have put a couple of amendments in there to even accelerate that process. And so it's actually a filtration method. So any nutrients that come in that water get grabbed up by the soil organisms. They process them, put them in the right form. They'll get them into a form that's biologically accessible to the plants, and then they'll just feed them directly to the plants. So it's something where the plants get the nutrients that they need directly from the soil organisms. There's actually going to be organisms in here that will go out and find rock particles, and they say if the plant gives them a signal that they're low on phosphorus, they will mine it directly out of the rock particles that we've put in here and then feed it to the plant. And so it's the plants are going to get all of the nutrients that they need, and because the soil is so rich, the plants don't really compete for nutrients. So you can plant a lot more densely than you do in other gardens. And really, the only thing that they're going to compete with is for each other is soil. There's sunlight.
Okay. So basically you've mimicked nature as much as possible in
Yeah,
order to create this
yeah.
system that is natural.
Hmm.
Um, we don't need to add any extra amendments. We don't
No,
have to add anything other than our kitchen wastes
correct.
and the plants.
Yeah. And the soil that it produces as an output is very very fertile. It's more fertile than what you put in it, because all of that fertility was already contained in the materials that we put in the garden. So we don't need additional fertilizers. It'll break it down. It'll make them more biologically active, more biologically acceptable to the plants, accessible to the plants. And then when we put it out, it's going to increase both the fertility and the biological activity in the soil in other gardens.
Awesome. So, have we missed anything? Did we cover kind of how it grows?
More or less. I think that's at least the high view. I mean, I could go on for hours and hours.
Quite a bit. When you put 12 different types of gardening and
Yeah.
kind of broken down their pros and cons and kind of become a problem solution solver for each one of the cons in order to create it, I'm sure you could probably go on and great deal about much of that.
I mean, if you want, I can pick one of those methods and say, okay, let's talk mycofiltration.
So if somebody did want to talk to you in greater science about any of these aspects, how would they contact you?
If you can find me on Facebook on my LEHR Gardens page, or through lehrgarden.com. That's lehrgardensingular.com. No S on that one.
You know, my
LEHR. So that's probably a good point. LEHR Garden it's an acronym that means that for linking ecosystem and hardware for regeneration. So that's the one thing that's really unique about this garden systems. Most garden systems out there either focus on the ecosystem side of things to the exclusion of technology, or to the technology side to the exclusion of the ecosystem. A LEHR Garden uses both the ecosystem and the technology to a very high level that allows the whole thing to really plug those different holes where that lead to human labor in other garden systems.
Awesome. Well, we're glad to have you here and to show some of this off. And
thank you.
I'm sure people can come and visit it on Saturdays.
Absolutely.
And check it out and talk to the volunteers here if you're not here.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm really excited to see what this garden can do for Clark Park. You know, as we really start dialing in soil creation and improving the soil in the other beds, and you know, this of course being its own production method as well. It'll produce vegetables, it'll produce fruit, it'll produce, if we're lucky, mushrooms. Sometimes mushrooms can be a little finicky, like I said, but they're in there. And if they decide that they're happy enough, they'll come out and produce food.
Hopefully we can make them happy.
Hopefully we can make them happy.
I just want to check in. It looks like Frank's online. Frank, did we cover any questions that you had?
I had a question about the type of fish that are used, and is somebody going to have to feed them on a regular basis, or do they get fed from the garden itself?
What? So did you hear the question?
No, I didn't.
Frank asked what kind of fish are we going to be using, and do they have to be fed?
Hold on. Now I'll just turn this back on. So the fish themselves will. We've talked about a couple of different options. It'll turn itself off as soon as it connects. Yeah. So the fish. We've talked a couple of different options. So Morgan in her baby biosphere has a number of goldfish, and if they ever show their little heads, we could actually bring them here and put them in. If we did larger fish, yeah, we would actually have to feed them, and you can set that up fairly easily with an automatic fish feeder. It's something that's fairly easy to do. If we did something a little bit smaller, like if we did rosy red minnows, will live through you can get those for 16 cents a piece at PetSmart. They'll live through the wintertime. They don't necessarily do super well in the heat of summer. But Jay, the guy who organized this whole thing, is going to look into Arizona pupfish. And I'm really hoping that he can find those. It's an Arizona native fish. They're small fish. They stay small. They're going to be good because they're a native fish. They'll be good from the low temperature all the way to the high temperature of the water that's here. They're very tolerant of low oxygen water. We'll put a little aerator pump on here to kind of keep the water moving and keep it oxygenated. But if that dies in the middle of the night, the pup fish should be fine. I think that they said it was they're good up to about 115 degrees of water temperature, or 110, something like that. So they're really, really tough little fish. If you put smaller fish in there, what'll happen is just through the natural ecosystem, we have a body of water here that has some level of nutrients in the water, and mosquitoes will come in and lay their larvae. You'll have other water bugs that just travel around, and they see a body of water and they go ahead and take advantage of it. And these little fish, like the mosquito fish or the pup fish, will actually eat those mosquito larvae. They'll keep the mosquitoes down. One of the things that I love about a Lear garden is, when you get mosquito season here in Phoenix during monsoon season, the mosquitoes will find little pockets of water all over the place, and then they swarm, and then they just kind of colonize just about everything. And the Lear garden is actually a source for that to some extent, or a solution to that, because the mosquitoes will all come here. They'll see, hey, this nice big body of beautiful water that's really biologically healthy. They're going to lay just tons and tons of eggs in it, and the fish just gobble it right up.
Yeah, so you don't have to worry about.
So you don't have to worry about it. Yeah, they mosquitoes come here to die.
That's a good thing. We don't have to worry about that in the future.
Yeah, and then of course, as the mosquitoes, for a little pup fish, a mosquito is a big juicy steak. And with that high protein snack, they'll eat the little bits of algae and other things that are in there too. But when you get that high protein snack, that's a little bit more nitrogen that goes into the system, and it just cycles through just like a natural ecosystem does. Those nutrients go into the soil and feed the plants.
Any other questions?
I have another question. So, at what point do you know that the system is working to its maximum, or you're going to have? When can you plant, and what are the fish going to provide? What are they there for?
What are the fish there for? The fish are primarily there to keep bugs down. If we didn't put the fish in here, this would be a huge source of mosquitoes. It'd be swarms and swarms of mosquitoes all the time. So the fish will actually keep that from happening. They do provide nutrients. If we don't feed the fish, we won't have enough fish that will be able to so the fish provide nutrients to the soil, but it's not going to be a lot of nutrients unless we feed the fish and have a lot of fish. So if we actually stock densely this tank, then then it would actually bring in some of those methods that aquaponics does, and you'll get a lot of nutrients from that.
Nitrogen for the most part.
Exactly. Yeah. So if we don't do that, then there will be small amounts of nitrogen that'll be added to the system.
They also keep the algae down in the tank itself.
So it's another part of that ecosystem. So the animals actually produce a lot of they provide a lot of benefit. They keep the pests down. They keep the whole system healthy.
And if we get too many, then we get nitrogen out of it.
Yeah, and if they die, and that's actually one of the things it's a lot more stable of a system than aquaponics. So in aquaponics, if you get a fish that dies, it starts to rot, and as the new nitrogen releases from the decomposition of the fish, it actually will overwhelm the ability of the garden of the aquaponics system to handle the nitrogen, which raises the level of nitrogen to toxic levels for the other fish. Then the other fish start dying, and the whole process, it just spirals downward. It's
but
rough.
By the filtration system, if one happens to die and we don't catch it for a while, then
exactly,
it just adds more nutrients to the soil.
Absolutely, yeah. I've never had a problem with it. It's something that's a self-correcting system in a Lear garden. What was his?
What was the second part of your question?
That was the first part. We answered the second part.
Well, I was just wondering, at what point do you feel that the system is working to its maximum potential?
Oh, it'll when you first build a system, being a biological system, it actually has to create a soil ecosystem. So right now, that process is already started. It started as soon as we added soil and water, and in the beginning, that process will take a couple of months. We've already planted plants in it. We put seeds in it. We didn't put any plant starts in it. And those seeds, I think I saw, it looks like maybe one or two of them are already germinating, unless I saw it wrong because it is dark out here. But the plants themselves will germinate and they'll start helping that process of soil creation. So it's actually going to be productive more or less from day one. If we had put plant starts in here, they would be healthy, they would be happy, they would be growing now. But as the soil breaks down a little bit, it becomes richer, and it'll be productive pretty quickly. Optimally,
The optimal.
yeah, optimal. I would say, it starts within a month or so of first creating it, and then it runs for probably about 8 months. As the soil breaks down, and the soil actually will become almost 100% earthworm castings. So it's a really rich, loose, uh, almost clay-like soil. And so what happens is the soil will actually, the particle sizes get so small that the water doesn't flow through it very well. And then it starts to get a little bit waterlogged. And that just means you need to harvest the soil and use that as an output, and then rework in more chunky material to feed the soil organism. So it will actually slow down a little bit as the soil matures, but then you harvest the soil, you put more stuff in, and it's right back. You don't actually, the second time around, you harvest about 80% of the soil. If you sift the soil out and take the big chunks of particulate matter that are there, you put them back in, that soil ecosystem, those healthy soil organisms are going to already be there. So it doesn't have that startup phase again. It just goes straight into productivity.
So I'm hearing for the first time since we set it up, it'll take about 2 months to actually have our highest input. And then from 2 months to about 8 months will be our peak.
Yeah.
And then it'll start to fade toward
Yeah.
the end of that harvest. And then we'll harvest that.
Yeah.
Put new soil in. We won't have to have that first initial 2 month stage. It'll be right back to where it was. And then we'll have another 6 to 8 months.
Yeah.
Depending.
Yeah. Now, one of the things that we did, the design of this particular garden, we made the soil only 12 inches deep. I usually do either 12 or 18 inches deep on the soil. And what that does is it gives you better contact with the water. It's sometimes the wicking when you create new soil is a little bit problematic at 18 inches, but you'll get a little bit longer of a lifespan out of the 18 inches of soil before it needs to be taken out.
Right.
My assumption on designing this one was that between harvests we can take out partially or all of the soil here. There's going to be a huge benefit to the rest of the community garden by having that healthy, nutrient-rich soil that we can add
because
out
we have
here.
27 boxes plus the orchard plus the volunteer
Exactly.
boxes, and we have the grains that are going in.
Exactly.
We can definitely use that amendment that's natural and healthy.
And one of the things that can be done with that, might be a really fun class here, is we can bring in some materials and take the worm castings that we take out of the Lehr garden and create worm castings tea. And then that acts as a drench over the rest of the garden, that will just do amazing things for the biological activity in the soil. One of my favorite quotes that kind of,
it's not quite a set and forget garden.
no, it's not. I mean, it's something that you're still going to have to plant it. You're still going to have to harvest it. You're still going to have to change the soil out once or twice a year, probably twice a year because of because it's only 1 foot. I did that on purpose. But it's not going to need, if everything shuts down because of COVID, you can walk away from this garden for weeks at a time, and you can, it'll just sit there and run itself. It'll water itself. It'll fertilize itself. It'll take care of itself.
And one of the benefits is it's raised, so it's easier for us to take care of it, and also less weeding. We don't have to worry about the Bermuda sneaking in from the bottom.
Yeah, and the water, the soil is so loose and friable. When I dig in Lehr garden soil, I almost never even use a trowel. I just use my bare hands, and it's so if you do get bits of Bermuda that go in there, you just pull them right out. The soil is so soft and loose that they come out pretty easily.
All right, Frank, did we have another question?
Yeah, just one last question. How do you ensure that compost, the kitchen wastes, are converted into compost quickly and properly? Do you get flies as well and anything like that?
The big part of that is really the earthworms. I mean, like any system, once it's as it's kind of equalizing itself, it'll kind of go through some stages. But what we're going to do is we're going to put earthworms in the garden, and lots of them. And this is actually, that's I was going to mention, that's another benefit of it is this thing will produce tens of thousands of earthworms. Even if you just put in a handful to begin with, they'll reproduce in here. This is something that's a very very good environment for earthworms. So they will breed in here as you put kitchen scraps in here. It's something that they'll be able to. They'll get in there and they'll break them down as a composting system. I've discovered that a Lehr garden is really possibly even faster than a tumble composter, because the water as it flows through aerates the soil, aerates the compost. So as the water floods in, because the pump is running, all of the bad air, the carbon dioxide that's inside it, kind of bubbles out. And then when the water drains down, it sucks in good air. So it aerates itself several times a day. It doesn't do hot composting, but it is a very active compost system. And then of course the earthworms will get in there, and they're just absolutely voracious. It's something where if bugs are a little bit of a problem, it's actually really easy to build a little top for it, and screen it so that the flies can't get in. The earthworms, of course, will still be able to get in. They come in and out through the soil.
I've noticed on the ones that I've seen is that because it's being watered multiple times, or at least this is from my layman's observation, is because it's being watered and being moved quite a bit in that process, that it doesn't give the flies a chance to actually land.
Yeah.
And do their business.
Yeah, the fly, the maggots from house flies are fairly intolerant of water. They don't like to be flooded. Yeah. And so when you have that flood and drain cycle, they will land. They'll try and lay their eggs, but they'll drown if the water is standing in there for hardly any period of time. Whereas the earthworms are super tolerant of being flooded. They don't start coming to the surface until they've been flooded for a couple of hours. Another one that'll move in here, it's native to where we are here. That's or at least not necessarily. I don't know if it's the black soldier fly larva. I don't know if they're native or if they've just gone wild here. But black soldier fly larva will find this. They actually get in and they consume both the compost and the soil. And black soldier fly larvae are absolutely incredibly voracious.
They eat about 3 times their body weight a day.
Yeah.
And then because they're eating 3 times their body weight a day, then they become they double in size
Yeah.
as well, but they're not as the flies themselves. They don't hover the same way as a housefly does.
They don't swarm.
They don't swarm, and they kind of stay within a couple feet of where they're at. So if they do actually go to maturity, which usually doesn't happen,
Yeah, but
they kind of stay in the larva stage.
exactly. They don't bite, they don't sting, they don't swarm. The adult black soldier flies don't actually have a mouth, so they can drink, but they can't eat. So their whole sole purpose is to mature, lay eggs, die, and so
they only live like 24 hours.
No, I think they live like maybe 3 days, but
Okay.
yeah, it's not very long though. Yeah,
Okay.
so but again, they one of the other benefits of the black soldier fly larva is that they actually actively drive away the house flies. So the flies don't like being in the same place that the black soldier fly larvae are, because I think they're just so much more aggressive.
One of the other things about it flooding quite a bit, the 8 times a day, is it doesn't allow the compost to really give off any odor as well.
Correct. Yeah.
There's not much mold that grows, and there's
Yeah.
not, you know.
Yeah, it's something that and it breaks down so fast too that it's all of those nutrients that in a compost bin, if you are putting just a ton of food waste in there, I mean it still helps. It's still helpful to put woody material like compost or wood chips or something, or the city compost, this mulchy compost, or wood chips or paper scraps or whatever.
Cardboard. Worms love cardboard.
Yeah, they do. All of those things still help the garden produce soil, but if you're not putting those in there, it'll still keep the odor down and keep it composting regularly. One of my favorite things I had about a year ago, I had a pumpkin that had gone bad, and it wasn't a cut pumpkin. It just sat on the counter for too long. It started to get a little soft on the bottom, and I put it in the garden, and I came back a week later, and there was a little scrap of skin from the top of the pumpkin that was this big around, and that was it. That was all that was left of the pumpkin. The thing had completely decomposed in 1 week. And then about 2 weeks later, I saw some time-lapse video that showed up on a couple of garden groups where everybody was losing their mind because you were watching the time-lapse of this pumpkin decompose over 60 days. Mm-hmm. And it's like, wow, that only took 60 days. Well, mine only took 7.
Right.
So,
well, one of the other things is about compost can be very finicky about what you can put in it, like no onions or citrus or meat in there. But because of the worms and the soldier fly larva that comes in there, you don't have to be as picky.
Yeah.
As you would normally for other composting.
Exactly. Yeah, and one of the things I think it's partially also because of the constant flow of water through it, or the regular flow of water through it. A lot of those compounds, those aromatic compounds that drive away the earthworms, just get flushed down the drain and picked up by the soil and used as fertilizer. I had one of the.
We don't want to do 20 pounds of oranges.
Yeah, but citrus is a big one that you're not supposed to use for earthworms. Earthworms don't like it.
To throw it in there.
I went out. I've got a picture someplace. I went out in my garden one time and I had a half a grapefruit and it was bowl side up. And I went out at night and there was about 200 worms sitting in the bowl of the grapefruit, perfectly happy eating away.
And then if you have a verma composter, that would totally decimate your system. So
yeah. So yeah, and I've put I have a family member who has a fruit tree, and they just dump off boxes and boxes of lemons and oranges and grapefruits all winter long for us, and those all go straight into the LEHR garden compost at my house, and I've never had a problem with it.
Any other questions?
Well, another question that comes to mind is the watering. If all you have is seeds, you don't really need to flow tons of water through the system. I know you have added emitters, spray emitters that will be watering initially until you can get them growing, so that the water coming from the top end will be what will water the roots. So you do have emitters spraying initially for the first month or so before you switch to, because you probably don't need to flow through the kitchen waste section of it, or you still run the water just as you would if the plants were fully grown.
The spray emitters do help, and we've got Cass visiting here already. The spray emitters do help the seeds get started. Once it also helps right now when the soil is loose and chunky, so the water isn't necessarily going to wick up through it as well. So we probably want to try and run those for a couple of months. Right. Until the plants are mature enough to get their roots down into it. But right now the seeds are going to mostly get watered by the surface water. That's correct. However, we do still want to run the water, flow the water through, because number one, it does, as we start putting food waste and other forms of compost in here.
2 month period.
Yeah, it'll help.
It's that 2 months period.
Yeah, it'll help the compost break down, but really the biological activity in the soil is going to be accelerated by the flood and drain system. So what happens is the soil itself needs to breathe. It needs. So I was talking to a master gardener a couple of years ago, and he was saying that the conventional wisdom is you can't put over 1/3 organic matter in soil, because the soil will become anaerobic. That breakdown of the organic matter will actually suck all the oxygen out of the soil. Well, this is about 95% organic matter.
Well, and two, like also for seeds don't, contrary to most people's understanding, seeds themselves don't need fertilizer to germinate. They actually will not use it. It's a kind of a waste of material.
Mhm.
So honestly, until the root systems are established, they don't need any nutrients. Once the roots become established, then that's when the plants are like, oh yay, we're out of our baby phase, and we can actually start using that. So by having the system and building up the soil while they're germinating, allows them to have that access to it when they need it.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, and one of the little sneaky tricks that a LEHR garden does, if you go talk to just about any gardener or landscaper, they will tell you that if you lay out a big old wood chip bed and then plant your plants in it, it's guaranteed 100% your plants are going to die. The reason for that is because plants need nitrogen to grow. Once they get past that early seedling stage, they're going to start pulling in lots and lots of nitrogen. Well, if you put a lot of woody material into the soil, the mushroom mycelium, it's whether you put it in and it's the thing that you want it in there, or whether it just finds its way in naturally, mushrooms will form. Not necessarily mushroom, but fungus will form. And as it needs to grow into the wood chips. And as it tries to grow into those wood chips, it needs nitrogen to grow. It needs its own nitrogen. So it'll be really aggressive, and it'll suck all the nitrogen out of the soil around it so that it can grow into those wood chips, break the wood chips down, and then once it has completed its life cycle, it dies, and then that nitrogen is re-released as it breaks down. And so having that water that flows through the system will not only it'll sort of equalize what's available. It'll bring any nitrogen from the compost, from the fish. That's any nitrogen that's loose in the system will dissolve into the water, and it'll flow through. And so it helps sort of equalize the peaks and valleys of those nutrients, so that the soil can really form the way you need to in a healthy way.
And we chose to put seeds in ours because that's what we had readily available for cost effectiveness of a community garden.
Yep.
We run off of volunteers and donations. But you can put transplants
Absolutely.
in there from the get-go as well.
Yeah, and I've had several gardens where we do that, and Greg Peterson, a local garden celebrity, we built one in his backyard, and he called me up a couple months later, and he goes, I've just never seen a garden that was productive 45 days after I built it. He was harvesting out of his garden. We put plant starts in his, and he was harvesting 45 days later, just a mere month and a half. That's pretty quick.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Back to you, Frank. Any additional questions?
I can't think of any at the moment. Something that comes to mind is providing shade and things like that, like we do in the raised beds. Does this garden provide access to putting in like curved PVC pipe where you can put a shade cloth over it, or does that need it?
It's 4 feet wide, just like our
Yeah.
beds, so the hoops
Yeah,
will work just fine. And even if the cold we wanted to do tomatoes ever, we could actually put plastic over it and
Yeah.
create a hothouse in the
Absolutely.
winter.
Yeah, it's something that lends itself well to that, but also the organic living soil is a life support system for the plants. So they'll tough it out a little bit more than they will necessarily in other garden systems.
And I noticed mine, I've been like watching the temperature of the soil, and it tends to be about 10 degrees lower than the ambient temperature as well. So the constant flow of water actually keeps it, and that's one of the plants. One of the reasons, it's not necessarily the sun. Yes, plants can get sunburned, but one of the aspects of the summer is that the water actually the soil dries out. So if you can keep the soil constantly going, then you end up with a huge amount, especially if you're growing tropicals. They don't necessarily need shade, like your okras and your rosellas and all of those kind of tropicals. As long as their feet are wet, they're happy.
And the one of the other things about that as well is because you have a body of water that you're aerating and cooling down, keeping at least cooler than the ambient temperature in the summertime. And you're providing some shade and you're providing some airflow that's going to help the water evaporate. You actually have when the water flows through the garden, it's going to actually help cool that soil down, and that's actually how I've managed to get mushrooms to grow outside in Phoenix, Arizona, or in this case, Tempe, Arizona.
Yeah, because your garden was never shaded, and yet you had
Correct.
a crop throughout the entire summer.
Yeah, mine will grow absolutely all year round, and you just it does become a matter of, it's not magical. It does become a matter of picking the right crops for the conditions and for the season. You're not going to be able to grow butter crunch lettuce in July.
You're not going to anyways. No, not unless we create, a whole nother ecosystem that we manage.
Yeah.
The other thing I've noticed is, that the cats are checking it out, but by creating a moist soil, they're not going to use it as their litter box.
Oh, yeah.
They don't like getting their paws wet.
Oh, okay.
Most cats don't like getting their paws wet. So
well, and maybe what'll happen, and I know in my garden, one of the things that I really love about it is watching the local ecosystem discover that there's something healthy and alive here. The hummingbirds move in, the praying mantis, the ladybugs, and in my garden, unfortunately, the curved-billed thrushes move in, and they see that open soil and they figure out that there's worms in there, and they always seem to be most interested in looking for the worms under my newly germinating plants. So maybe the cats will keep those down a little bit.
Probably. Hopefully.
Yeah. What type of wood products, wood pieces would you recommend that we accumulate? I would imagine we're always going to have to provide some for the garden, have them ready, available to be put into the bed. I know that I had a neighbor that just cut down his mother's acacia tree or trimmed it, and Morgan thought that that wouldn't be appropriate to use as opposed to a mesquite.
No, acacia would be fine. Acacia is actually in the same family as a mesquite. It's a nitrogen fixing tree.
Yeah, but I was worried more because they tend to send out saplings. I didn't want root systems, especially when we're first getting started.
Yeah, if it's
So it was a brand new, freshly cut tree, and those will, if it was dead and had been dead for a while,
yeah.
but a brand new, freshly dense tree, I was worried about it sending out and
Okay,
rooting.
yeah, that could potentially be an issue if you've got a particularly weedy tree. That might be problematic, but otherwise, for the most part, just about anything. The only thing I tend to avoid, nothing toxic. So no oleanders, no castor beans,
No eucalyptus.
no eucalyptus.
Or chase tree, monk tree. They're all in the same family.
Yeah. Those things are toxic. Basically, what'll happen there is I don't know if they're going to harm the earthworms. That will definitely kill your fish.
Yeah, they'll actually kill the soil too.
Do they?
Yeah.
Okay. So also from a mushroom growth standpoint, most of if you're trying to aim for edible mushrooms, most of the commonly cultivated mushrooms don't like pine, and they don't like palm. They will break down. I don't think I've ever put pine in my garden. I have put palm in the garden, and they take a long time to break down. It's not going to hurt it so much. But anything that's a hardwood, anytime you trim a tree, what I do, actually you've got a chipper here. Do you have a function? Is it a functioning chipper now, or is it?
We have access to one.
We have access. Okay. You run it through the chipper, and you have a pile of wood chips, and you can just take those and work them straight in, that'll feed your soil.
So mostly any hardwood that is a month or two older.
Yeah,
about a month or two old.
Even stuff that's pretty fresh, it'll as long as it's not going to take root and decide to form a new tree, then it'll be fine. It
So
might just sit down.
So when we trim the citrus or the apples or
Absolutely.
the pomegranate or even the sunflowers when they become overly abundant,
Absolutely.
all of those can go into the.
Yeah, and that's actually one of those things that really makes it a form of, back to the acronym, linking ecosystem and hardware for regeneration. It's that regenerative aspect. So regenerative agriculture creates habitat, and it creates soil, and really you want it to sequester carbon in the soil. And so the soil creation process really comes from a plant that's got its feet in the soil, is pulling nutrients out of the soil, creating biomass. That biomass is harvested, whether it drops on its own or gets pruned, and then gets created into soil. So from a permaculture standpoint, what you typically do is the chop and drop, where you chop it up, drop it down, and it'll sit there, especially in this hot, dry environment, for 2 to 3 years before it really breaks down. But what a Lehr garden does is it allows you to really accelerate that chop and drop process. You chop it, you drop it in the Lehr garden, it breaks down into fine particulate soil in just a matter of 6 months to a year. Then you take that part out and you put it back on the tree, and not only do you grow food through the decomposition process, but you're also getting that finely broken down amendments into the tree soil quicker.
All right.
No, I'm good. No, I'm good. I can't think of anything. Now, I guess I should say, Ed, if you could provide that information on how people can contact you, either by putting it on comments below, or I don't know how they do it on Facebook, but you may want to repeat what you said was a good way to contact you.
Okay.
And we'll talk to you later.
All right, awesome. Yeah, just if you go on Facebook, if you go on Facebook or Instagram under Lehr Gardens with an S, or if you go to my web page, lehrgarden.com without the S. That's probably the easiest way. There's contact information for me on there.
And Larry spelled how again?
LEHR.
All right. Thank you, Frank, for questions. But yeah,
Thanks, Frank.
my nose is getting cold and my fingers
Yeah.
are because I'm a desert baby.
I've been cheating and putting my hands in my pockets.
Yeah, I was wondering about that. It was very enjoyable. Thank you so much, the two of you. You have a good evening.
Stop recording.